Hi guys, welcome back. So we are at the end of our class. So the next thing is we have to add lights and render the final image. So as you can see, I actually completed the entire texturing here and shading process. And now here also I added a plane for the grass also. So what you can do is after completing a similar plane, and now you can actually just make a few duplicates of this particular grass, and you can just arrange it throughout the entire model. So you will have a few more grass in the scene, and you will have much more plants in our scene. So this is an easy way to populate your scene with multiple plants and multiple designs and all. And if you have a variation of the same texture, for now, as you can see, everything is in some kind of dry grass. I have painted it, and if you want to make it much more greenish, you can actually save us that particular texture, and you can make a color edit in that, and you can make it much more uh, green color, similar to our ground grass color. So for now we will just stick with this only. And once you completed this entire shading process, now you can just go to the Arnold tab in the top, and you can just select the render option. And once you click on that, you will get a render menu like the render panel like this. Here in the top you have an option for playing and stopping. For now we'll just keep it at stop only. So since we actually not added any lights or anything, nothing will be visible properly. And the next thing is in the view panel, we'll go to the view panel, and for the test resolution we will select it. For now we'll just select a 50%. So whatever the size we have selected, default size, if it's full HD, instead of full HD you will get the 50% of that, that is 720p. And we'll just keep it like that. And once you added a few lights in the scene, then we can actually play around, and we can see how the output is coming. So the next thing is we can go to the Arnold tab in order to create lights, or you can go to the Arnold menu in the top. So if you go to the Arnold menu in the top, there is an option called lights, and in the lights itself you have a few different options, like area light, which is a rectangle light, and it will have an area. We can actually scale it up and down in order to create a larger or a smaller area to the light to be lit. And we have a sky dome light, which will be a complete sphere, and it will produce the light from around the scene. And after that we have a mesh light. That means we can actually create a 3D mesh, and you can convert that into a mesh light. Then we have a photometric light, and that is for interior designing and all. You can see some wall lights and all, that you can use for photometric lights. And you have light portal, that is for windows and interior and exterior designs. You will have a windows. You can actually create a light portal which will have a morning or evening effect, something like that. Then you have a physical sun and sky. You can select that also. For now we will just create a area light. Once you click on that light, you can see in the scene itself a rectangle light will be created. And we can see few options related to the light in the attribute editor, and that will have a name called AI area light shape 1. And as you created few more, and the shape 1 shape 2 will be created, and you will have multiple lights on the scene. And here in the settings itself we have an option called color, which will actually literally mean the color of the light. For now we actually stick with the white color itself. The next thing is intensity, and we actually in Arnold we actually have work with the exposure of the light instead of the intensity. And a few of the other rendering plugins and plugin rendering softwares actually work with intensity rather than exposure. In Arnold, we are actually working with exposure, so we'll keep the intensity at 1, and the exposure we will be able to control it much more closely and easily. We can actually control the light much more effectively using the exposure. For now, we'll just keep the exposure at 1, and for now we will just start the IPR, and now you can see since we actually added the exposure to be 1, we are actually seeing the models in the render panel. And okay, and as you increase the value of that exposure, you can see you are able to see much more of the output. So for now we'll just keep it maybe 5, and if you play it now, you can see the entire model is actually properly visible in the render view. The next thing is we can actually use the color temperature, and if you enable that option, we have an option for temperature, and you can actually edit the values in the temperature tab, and you will be getting a much different uh, output. More temperature, you can actually adjust the temperature, and you will be getting a different version of the light there itself. You can actually control the temperature also. After that, we have a live shape. You can actually stick with the quad, or you can change it to cylinder, or you can make it a disc. So you can actually change the entire model based on the shape also. So each shape will have a light coming from that particular shape. So if you make it a cylinder, you will have a light which is in the shape of a cylinder. So you can actually, for now, what we will do is we'll just make the shape to a disc, and the next thing is we have an option called samples. In Arnold, we are actually working with the samples in order to increase or decrease the quality of the render. So for now, we are actually having a sample of 1, and so if you increase the number of samples, you will be getting a much more finer output in the lighting settings. So the problem is, once you added samples in the lighting also, you will have a samples for texturing. If you go to the render settings here in the top, you can see a option called display render settings. If you click on this particular option, you will be getting the render settings. Here in the Arnold render tab, you have an option called sampling. In the sampling settings only, you can see a lot of options like a camera AA, which will control the entire sample of the final image, which will control the entire sample. And then you have a sample for the diffuse, which will control the texturing, how much quality in the texture. The second one is specular, which will control how much closely you are getting in the reflectivity and the specularity of that objects. The third one is transmission. The more transmission means you will get a much more transparent output, and less or zero means you will not get any transparency at all. And SSS means subsurface scattering, which is for skin materials and related things, milk, that kind of things, dairies, and that kind of things. And volumetric means if you have any volume like a fog or something like that, that will control that option also. So this is the main settings in the final rendering option. You will only have to focus on the entire sampling settings. Here itself you can control the entire quality of the render image. The rest of the things you can actually keep it the same as default. You don't have to go back and change any of these settings, because most of the times you only have to edit the sampling settings, and you will get a much more proper output in here itself. And in sampling, how it will work is, in Arnold, the sampling is actually you have to focus on properly, otherwise you will be adding too much of sampling, and the final render will be taking too much of time in order to render. So for example, here how it will work is, in camera samples we have 3, so it will multiply itself. That means 3 into 3 it will become 9, and that 9 will be the main sample, which is camera AI sample. After that, diffuse values, again it will multiply itself, which is 2 into 2 it will be 4, and that 4 multiplied by 9 will be 36. That will be the diffuse samples. So how it works is, 3 into 3 is 9 samples, which is the camera total sample, and the same way diffuse will multiply itself, and the resulting amount, which is 2 into 2 4, and that value will be multiplied with the main sample, which is 9, and it will become the diffuse sample, which is 36. If I make it 4 samples, here you can see now 4 into 4 16, which is the main sample. Here also 2 into 2 is equal to 4, and 4 into 16 will become 64 samples. So every time you are adding a new sample here in each of these values, it will multiply itself, and the total number of samples will be calculated. And the samples you are adding in the light value, which will not be visible in the render settings, and that will actually have much more impact on the final render also. For example, if you are thinking that it will not affect the final render, and you are adding value sample 10 samples in the light value, it will take more time, and even if you are keeping it low in this main render settings, but you still have a higher number of samples in the lights. So how many lights you have, like if you have a 10 lights, and each of these lights have a sample of 10, and that will have 100 samples. 100 into whatever samples you are added in the render settings will be taking a lot of time, and so you will always have to remember to add the enough samples. For example, since we don't have any subsurface in the rendering, we can actually keep it at 1, or you can keep it at 0, so that will remove a few samples, and it will reduce some of the render time. Same way we can actually reduce the volume indirect, since we don't have any, we can actually keep it at 1, and the camera AI samples you can actually keep it at 2, and the rest of the things you can keep it at 2 itself, or you can make the camera samples 3, and everything else you can keep it at 2. So this is a basic sampling method, and you will get a properly render output this way. And in the lights also you can always keep it samples at 2, so that way you, even if you have a total number of 10 lights in the scene, and the total number of light samples will be 20, along with render samples, which is like maybe 200 or something like that. Here itself you can see the total number of 117, and plus 20 will be making it around 137, which is not too much of samples for a beginning. So you can actually keep it like that. So you always have to keep that in mind while rendering the final image. So after creating this light, same way you can actually scale it. When you scale it much more, the light impact will be much more, and as you make multiple lights, you will start getting a much more refined output in the lighting. So once you completed one light, you can actually start placing them in the scene. I'll just rotate it slightly like that, and I will just place it just under our main mushroom house, so that way it will be like it's actually lit by the mushroom, uh, so it will have much more interesting look. compared to light emitting from somewhere else. So after you place that, now you can actually just play, and now you can see it's actually lit from that mushroom itself. It is much more interesting to see that way. So once that is done, you can actually start moving the light around. That way you will be able to keep it much more closely, and you can now avoid most of the shadows, that kind of things. So now we actually completed one light, and if you want to make it much more exposure, you can actually keep it at maybe 8. One more thing you have to remember is always increase the exposure in one, like 6 to 7, 7 to 8, like that. So that way you will have much more control over the entire process. If you suddenly jump to 10 5 to 10, or 10 to 15, like that, the entire effect will be much more, and you will not be able to control the lighting properly. So now the main light I'll just keep, main mushroom light I'll keep it at 7. After that, again, this time I'll just go to the Arnold shelf, and here I'll click on the first one, which is create area light, and I'll just create a light. I'll make it really big, and I'll keep it as our main fill light. That way the entire model will be properly lit. And now we will add an exposure of starting with 1. And once you start adding that, when you are happy with the final lighting, now you can see it's actually started to visible everything properly. And I'll just move it slightly down. Okay, so this is our one of our main light. After that, again what we will do is we'll just come back to the previously created light, which is the disk light we created for our main mushroom house. We will just select the object and press Ctrl D to create a duplicate, and we'll just move it to the second mushroom. And here also we will just align it, rotate and align it slightly, so that also will be seen as the mushroom itself is lit, and it's actually emitting the light. So it'll have much more impact on the final render. Similar to the inside of our mushroom color, and we'll make it, instead of a dark color, we'll make it much more brighter, so that way a similar color will be reflected, and everything will be properly aligned. So one more thing what you can do is, you have something called film gate inside our render view. So here actually you can go to the view panel. Here in the one of these icons you can find and locate something called a resolution gate, and next is film gate. You can just enable this resolution gate and film gate, and you will be able to see which area will be rendered properly. So you can actually properly align and place the model properly, and so whatever is inside this film gate and film gate area will be properly rendered in the final render view. So that way you will be able to see much more properly which part is actually going to be properly rendered. So here I'll just select the one of our main light also, and here also I'll just change the color slightly in order to get a interesting output. So now two of our mushrooms have their own lights. The next thing is, we will continue the same process, and I'll add I'll make a duplicate of that light and I'll place it for a smaller mushroom also. And I will change the color for that one also to be slightly bluish. So each of our mushrooms now have different lights for themselves. After that we have a light, a main light which is in white, and now we will, this is our main fill light. So now we have to add two more lights in the back, so everything will be properly lit. So what we will do is we'll just create one more light and we'll just push it back. And this one will be one of our rim lights, and this one light will be used for lighting the back side of our model, and this one will be placed something like that, and we'll add an exposure of 5. So we will just take a test run. Now you can see a rim light in the side area, so that light also is actually resembling a lighting properly, and it's actually illuminating the side, and which creates a slightly rim light on each of the models. So the same similar way we are actually going to create a light on the opposite side also. So what we will do is we'll just duplicate the same light. We'll just move to the opposite side and we'll just rotate it like that. And this time what we will do is each of these rim lights you can actually add a different color. So for now the first one I'll just select, and for this light I'll enable the temperature and I'll keep it around 3000, which will be having a little bit of orange tint effect. And since this mushroom have a reddish kind of color, so it will actually match with the temperature. And on the right side we will just enable the temperature and we will just keep it around 10,000, which will have a bluish kind of effect. Since they are both duplicates, so for the first one I'll keep the temperature at around 3000, so that one will have a slightly orange tint, and the second one I'll keep it at around 11,000, 10,000, so that one will have a more of a bluish tint. So after that for the main light I'll just make the exposure around 6, so it will be much more lit properly. And now we can actually take a test render. Both of these rim lights actually creating a slightly highlight area on each of the models, and you are actually getting a really proper output. So after that now we can see most of our front part of our area is actually not properly lit. So what you can do is we will create one more light which will illuminate the front area, the door, and all the rocks, everything properly. So again we'll just create a small light. We'll just make it slightly bigger and we'll just keep it in the front of our model, and we will keep the exposure to be 2. And now we will just take a test render. Now it's a little bit better, but still we are not able to see everything properly. So this time we can actually start increasing the exposure 2 from 3, and if that doesn't have a proper effect you can actually jump it to 4. maybe I'll keep it at 5. So that way we will have a much more proper visibility. And now we can see each of these models have a really high reflectivity. So now we can actually start reducing the reflective value, and everything will be properly arranged, and everything will be much more properly visible. So for now what we will do is we'll keep the reflectivity for the top of the mushrooms similar. For this main area, the door and the main bottom area of our mushroom, we will just select the model, and we'll go to the material attributes, and here in the specularity we'll just reduce the weight of that specularity. So now you can see the specularity for that particular model is actually reduced much more, and everything is actually properly visible. So same way we'll just select the ground, we'll go to the material attributes, and we'll just reduce the weight of the specularity. So that way we can actually go back to each of our model, and we will be able to control how much specularity each of these models will be having. And here you can see our plant have a much more plants have that transparency, and we are not seeing any of that black or that empty area. Everything is actually properly visible, and everything is actually all the alpha channel, everything is actually working properly. So once everything is aligned, all the lights are properly aligned, now you can actually go back and start editing that reflectivity for each of these materials. And after that you can just render a final image. So what I'll do is, now I'll just go back to each of these materials, and I'll start editing the specularity for each of these things. And now after that we'll come back, and we will see how that affecting our final result. Okay, now I have edited the specularity for the entire models. So now we are actually going to see the how that affected our final output. So now we can actually place the model in our camera view properly, and we will just make this render view much more bigger, so we will be able to see the output. And we'll just press the play button, and here since it's a progressive rendering, we will be seeing a seeing the result over time. We will be seeing the final result in over time. And like I said before, you can actually always go back and edit each of the models or the textures, how they are affecting the final output and all. So you can actually always go back and edit the result even after rendering also. So now it's actually have a much more effect. We are not seeing a lot of reflectivity. We are actually seeing a much more controlled way of editing the reflectivity. We are actually seeing only few of the things actually properly reflected, and a few of them are actually not at all reflecting. Okay, after that now what we will do is we'll just add a plane around our model. So all the lights, everything, instead of a black background we will be seeing a much more grayish or something like that. So a black background will not be having a proper effect on the final image. So we will just add a plane like this, like a studio plane, something like that. And this edge I will add a bevel, and I'll just press 3 in order to have a smoothed output. So after that, now we will be the next thing is, once you are happy with the entire lighting and all, what we will do is we will just select a proper camera view. After that, you can just lock the camera by clicking on this lock camera icon. Okay, now our sample final image is completed, and as you can see, it's actually have a really proper output. All the lights, everything is working properly. And once you are happy with the entire lighting and everything, after that what you can do is you can go back to the view option, and you can just change the resolution back to 100, or you can go back to this render settings. Here you can start adjusting samples, and for now, if you want much more finer output on the textures, you can actually add one more sample in the diffuse value. And if you want the specular to be much more proper, you can add one more value in the specular, that way. And everything else you can just keep it as it is. Otherwise, you can just one more option where you can edit is, you can go back to ray depth. Here also you have same samples, similar samples as in the same main sampling option. Here also you can actually add samples in order to have a final proper output. And everything else you can just keep it as it is, since we are actually not going much more deeper into the final rendering and the texturing in this lesson. And once you are happy with the entire sampling everything, then you can go to the common menu. Here you can select image format. You can select a png, jpg, or something like that. Or you can select a TIFF or .exr if you are editing the final image in Photoshop, any of the image editing. So by selecting EXR or TIFF, you will be able to get a raw image out, and you will be able to edit the colors, everything much more properly. And after that, selecting the image format, you can come down. Here you will be able to select either one of the presets, like 1K square or 2K, something like that. Or you can select a full HD, like HD 1080, and you will get a full HD version. And you can customize. If you want a custom resolution, you can actually add that also. You can add a resolution, all that you can add. So after everything is set, then you can actually come back here. Like I said, you can select a different camera view angle. If you want to focus on the door and other things, you can just select a camera view, like something like that, and you can start rendering. And that way you can actually focus on each of the specific model, and you'll be able to see a final much more refined output. And you can focus on each particular model, and you'll be able to see a proper final output. And you can actually always go back and edit the brightness. Okay guys, so that's it for now. Like I said, here you can adjust the exposure. You can actually make it 2 3 and all. You can see how it's actually affecting the final image. If more brightness will have more impact, or less will have more impact, like that you can adjust each of these values. And if you feel that maybe having one more exposure is good, then you can go back to each of this light, and you can add a exposure value In this final output you can see a lot of grains and a lot of artifacts in the background. So when we actually finally render, like I said, you can actually add more samples. And if I add more samples now, we will not be able to render everything properly. It will take much more time. So in the final project file, I'll be sharing few camera angles with the final image. Will not have any of this grains and all. So for now, that is it. And I hope you guys understood the entire process of modeling, texture painting, then shading, and finally the rendering, lighting and rendering process. If you have any doubts, ask your doubts and questions in the discussion tab. And I hope you guys enjoy the lessons and all. And make sure to follow the entire process properly, and create your own project, something interesting, and share with the community and your friends. And let me know your feedbacks, and share your projects, and I'll give you my feedbacks, and how to improve, or if you have any doubts, I'll help you with that also. So uh, hope you guys enjoyed the class, and I'll see you in the next one.